Game books as tie-in merchandise for established properties were around long before Animorphs was a thing. The majority of them in the 1980s were published under the Find Your Fate line published by Ballantine, with tie-in books for Indiana Jones, James Bond, Doctor Who, G.I. Joe, Gem and the Holograms, Thundercats, and Golden Girl and the Guardians of the Gemstones? Wow, that's an obscure one. I have a couple of books here that Find Your Fate did for Transformers, and dear mother of God, what happened? Oh, it looked like this book was once owned by a bedwetting tar monster. The most significant difference these books have to normal choose-your-own-adventure books is the lack of a you character. There are no self-insert presences here. You simply orchestrate the actions of the Autobots as they respond to whatever dastardly plan the Decepticons have at this time. There's a kind of sense to this. It's the books trying to approximate the ways kids play with Transformers toys, bashing them together in sandboxes and coming up with their own stories. The franchise has a fantastical nature. It's high adventure with crazy cartoon elements. And while this is not a universal truth, it seems that the more fantastical something is, the more likely a child playing make-believe with that franchise will, quote-unquote, transplant themselves into the story instead of simply entering the story. What I mean by that is that a kid is more likely to imagine themselves being Optimus Prime than they are to simply imagine themselves being part of the Transformers universe. Maybe they might imagine themselves as an original Transformer character, but fleshy 7-year-old Billy wouldn't have much to do in the war between the good robots and the bad robots. I mean, I'm sure some kids did, but I just don't feel they would be the likely majority. Same goes for virtually every other franchise under the Find Your Fate line. You're more likely to imagine yourself as Indiana Jones or James Bond or the Doctor or Gem than you are to imagine yourself as yourself, somehow being part of the adventure. So why is it easier for kids to imagine self-insert characters in Animorphs? Well, despite all the aliens and space gods and laser guns and superpowers, Animorphs is far less fantastical than your average Saturday morning cartoon. In fact, part of the point is that on the surface it has all the trappings of a silly Power Rangers wannabe, but is in fact a lot more real, a lot more violent, and a lot more deadly than anything you'd watch in your feety pajamas. There's also a more even ground between you and the characters. The Animorphs are meant to be normal kids like you and me. They aren't super athletic archaeologists or British secret agents or giant robots. They're kids you might find in your own classrooms, just moonlighting as superheroes. And finally, there's more accessible points of entry, with dozens of points in which your self-insert character might enter the story. Of course, that's not universal. I'm sure there are plenty of people who imagine themselves as specific Animorphs characters. But even then, they probably imagine themselves as one character, interacting with the rest of the cast through that character. And that's probably the biggest issue with these Find Your Fate Transformers books. Not that they're in the third person, but that the reader controls the actions of all the Autobots, not one specific character, and that completely removes the reader from the fantasy. It puts you in the role of a director, a story orchestrator, except the book doesn't even give you the tools to do that well. Unlike the limitless possibilities of orchestrating a story with toys in your sandbox or playing make-believe with friends, you are instead limited to whatever options the author comes up with. Game books just do not work that well without a focus on a singular protagonist. Interestingly, both Alternamorph books have a different way of tackling the fantasy of being part of the Animorphs. The first one is a general you character with no existing analog within the main series. It's pretty much a new character from the start. The second Alternamorphs instead puts you in the body of David. They don't go so far as to call him David, and they keep things vague enough in case it's a girl who's reading, but yeah, you're playing David. And the two Alternamorphs are isolated from each other. We all knew they were non-canon from the rest of the Animorphs, but they're not even canon with each other, so instead of being an ongoing series, Alternamorphs is instead a series of jump-on points for the spectrum of people who fantasize about being in Animorphs. Are you the kind of person who imagines themselves as themselves joining the Animorphs? There's an Alternamorphs for that. Are you the kind of person who imagines themselves as a pre-existing character? There's an Alternamorphs for that, too. Are you the kind of person who imagines extremely erotic adventures where Axe has penises for fingers and Marco grows a vagina in the back of his head and Rachel turns into a Willy Wonka blueberry girl? There is an alternative for that, but it's hidden deep within a secret vault below the Florence Cathedral. Good luck, treasure hunters. Of course, that's how the 80s did tie-in books. In the 90s, however, we got one of the most successful tie-in series ever with Give Yourself Goosebumps. If you'd like to explore that series and how it affected Alternamorphs, then you have my permission to click the Goosebumps logo below. If you think we should expand outward, however, then click the looking glass and we'll explore the place of game books today and where they might go in the future.